So about 6 years ago, I was living in Beijing for a few months on a fellowship, and I read in a local expat paper that you could go visit film studios around Beijing. So one weekend I went out to the China Film Group lot, which was in Huairou, kind of a far suburb outside the city, and spent a day wandering around old streets of Shanghai, traditional villages, and I was really fascinated by this whole world of Chinese film and television that I knew almost nothing about at the time. So over the next 5 years, I have made numerous trips to China, visited as many of these sites as I could associated with filmmaking in China. So the photographs in the book focus primarily on these enormous outdoor sets constructed at film studios around China. There are 13 locations represented in the book. Across the country, entire towns have been constructed around making film and television content, and local governments often provide financing in hopes of bringing in business and tourism to their region. But the scale really is unparalleled. Movie sets in China are not mere plywood facades. They are monumental fortresses, palaces, and entire urban neighborhoods of multi-story buildings. They really have more in common with Cecil B. DeMille's City of the Pharaoh of a century ago than with today's digital production facilities. And so while these sprawling back lots don't exist in Hollywood anymore, they're still very much alive in China. These sets all represent specific periods in China's history. So many TV shows and movies in China share the same historical settings. So we see the battles of the Warring States period, costume dramas of the Qing dynasty, the 19th century Opium Wars, gangsters in 1930s Shanghai, resistance under the Japanese occupation in the 1930s. And filmmakers reuse these locations over and over. These historical settings are so prominent in part because censorship rules limit the acceptable themes and settings for film and TV in China. State regulations prohibit certain types of content, and it's often easier to tell a story without getting into trouble when the story is set in the past. So one thing that stands out to me in visiting these film sets is the contrast you see between the content of the films being made, which is often historical, and the rapid pace and scale of modernization in China today. So this is evident when you see actors on break in their period costumes looking at their smartphones. And while China is developing at an astonishing pace, it's interesting that the most Googled TV show of all time is the story of Yangtze Palace, which is a period drama set in the Forbidden City. So I've tried to capture some of these contrasts and juxtapositions in the photographs. As a photographer, I am also intrigued by the tension between truth and fiction in these movie towns, especially when they're taken out of context. The sets themselves are like phantoms of real-world places. They're constructed from a hodgepodge of cultural fragments, props, billboards, architectural details. They sometimes contain bits of English text, sometimes nonsensical, but they only need to suggest a setting or a narrative. They're not really intended to stand on their own, and it's really only through the intervention of a plot, a storyline, actors, editing, that they are brought to life.